Hello everyone. Tonight we'll explore the harsh realities of daily life in a medieval Japanese samurai village and discover why most of us wouldn't last even a single day in this unforgiving world. Feel free to say hi in the comments. Let me know what time you're watching this and where you're tuning in from. I love seeing where everyone's listening from around the world. Picture this. The rooster crows at 4 in the morning, but you've already been awake for 30 minutes. Not by choice, mind you. The thin wooden walls of your home do absolutely nothing to block out the sounds of village life beginning before dawn. You hear the shuffle of straw sandals on dirt paths, the creak of wooden buckets being lifted from wells, and the distant sound of someone already chopping wood. You roll over on your straw mat, which sits directly on the hard wooden floor. There's no mattress, no soft bedding, just a thin layer of rice straw between you and the unforgiving planks beneath. Your back aches from months of sleeping this way, and you wonder how anyone gets used to it. The answer is simple. They don't. They just endure it because that's what life demands. The air inside your home is cold and damp. Winter in medieval Japan was no joke, especially in mountain villages where many samurai families established their domains. Your breath forms small clouds as you exhale, and you can feel the chill seeping through the gaps in the wooden walls. The only heat source is a small charcoal brazier in the center of the main room, but the charcoal is expensive and must be used sparingly. You stumble to your feet, joints protesting after the uncomfortable night's sleep. Your first task of the day is to tend the small fire that hopefully still has some embers glowing from the night before. If it's gone out completely, you'll need to restart it using flint and steel, a process that can take precious minutes you don't have to spare. The water bucket beside the fire pit has a thin layer of ice on top. You break through it with your fingers, the shock of cold water making you gasp. This water was drawn from the village well yesterday evening, and it's all you have for washing, drinking, and cooking until someone makes another trip to the well later today. Washing your face with this ice-cold water is a brutal wake-up call. There's no hot water unless you heat it over the fire, which means using more precious fuel. Most people in the village simply splash the cold water on their faces and call it good enough. Personal hygiene as we know it today was a luxury that few could afford. Your first meal of the day consists of a small bowl of rice gruel, maybe with a few pickled vegetables if you're fortunate. The rice is brown and coarse, nothing like the refined white rice we're familiar with today. It's filling but not particularly tasty, and you'll be eating some variation of this same meal 3 times a day for the rest of your life. Tea exists, but it's expensive and usually reserved for special occasions or when entertaining guests of higher social standing. Most of the time, you'll be drinking water or thin soup made from whatever vegetables are available. The idea of starting your day with coffee is completely foreign. Coffee won't reach Japan for several more centuries. As you eat your simple breakfast, you hear voices outside your door. The village is fully awake now, and people are beginning their daily tasks. You quickly finish your meal because lingering over food is seen as lazy, and laziness in a samurai village can have serious consequences. Stepping outside, you're hit with the full reality of your situation. The village stretches out before you, a collection of small wooden buildings connected by narrow dirt paths. Everything is built for function, not comfort or beauty. The houses are simple rectangles with thatched roofs designed to provide basic shelter and nothing more. The smell hits you immediately. It's a mixture of wood smoke, human waste, animal droppings, and cooking food all blended together into an aroma that would make most modern people gag. There's no sewage system as we know it today. Human waste is collected in wooden buckets and either used as fertilizer or dumped in designated areas outside the village. The paths between buildings are muddy and rutted from foot traffic and the occasional ox cart. When it rains, these paths become rivers of mud that can be ankle deep. When it's dry, the dirt turns to dust that gets into everything. Your feet, your clothes, your food, your lungs. There's no escaping it. You make your way toward the well at the center of the village, wooden bucket in hand. The well is the heart of community life, where people gather to collect water and exchange news and gossip. But even this simple task comes with unspoken rules and social hierarchies that you must navigate carefully. A samurai's wife approaches the well ahead of you. You must wait your turn and show proper respect by bowing when she acknowledges your presence. She doesn't speak to you directly because your social status doesn't warrant it, but she nods slightly in your direction, which is more courtesy than many receive. The water you draw from the well is cold and clean, but getting it requires significant physical effort. The bucket must be lowered 30 feet down the well shaft, allowed to fill, then hauled back up using a rope and pulley system. Your arms burn from the effort, especially since this is just the first of many trips you'll make to the well today. Walking back to your home with a full bucket of water is an exercise in balance and endurance. The bucket is heavy, the path is uneven, and spilling water means making another trip to the well. You move carefully, watching every step, while other villagers navigate around you with their own burdens. Back at your home, you begin preparing for your daily work. If you're a farmer, which most village residents are, your day will be spent in the fields tending crops. If you're a craftsman, you'll work in your small workshop creating tools, clothing, or other necessities. If you're a merchant, you'll prepare goods for trade with other villages. The tools available to you are basic but effective. A farmer might have a wooden hoe, a sickle for cutting grain, and a wooden plow if they're fortunate enough to own an ox. Everything is made by hand using techniques passed down through generations. There are no machines to make work easier, no shortcuts to increase efficiency. Working in the fields means spending the entire day bent over under the hot sun or in the cold rain, depending on the season. Your back will ache constantly, your hands will be permanently stained with dirt, and your skin will be weathered and tough from constant exposure to the elements. The crops you tend are primarily rice, which requires flooded fields and constant attention. The irrigation system is a complex network of channels and wooden gates that must be maintained and adjusted daily. One mistake in water management can destroy an entire season's crop, which means starvation for your family. Other crops include barley, millet, and various vegetables like radishes, turnips, and leafy greens. Everything grown must be carefully planned to provide enough food to last through the winter months when nothing grows. There's no grocery store to fall back on if your planning fails. Around midday, you pause for a brief meal. This consists of more rice, perhaps with some salted fish if it's available, and pickled vegetables. The pickled vegetables are essential because they're one of the few ways to preserve food without refrigeration. The salt and fermentation process keeps them edible for months. Water remains your primary beverage, though you might have access to sake on special occasions. Sake production is time-consuming and requires rice that could otherwise be eaten, so it's not something consumed casually. Most people go months without tasting alcohol of any kind. The afternoon brings more of the same work, but now you're also thinking about the social obligations that govern village life. Everyone has a specific role and status within the community hierarchy, and stepping outside those boundaries can result in serious punishment. At the top of the hierarchy are the samurai families who own the land and have the power of life and death over everyone else. Below them are the farmers, who are respected because they produce food but are still considered lower class. Artisans and craftsmen occupy a middle position, valued for their skills but not their social status. At the bottom are merchants and traders, who are viewed with suspicion because they profit from other people's work without producing anything themselves. This social order is rigid and unchanging. You are born into your position and will die in the same position. Your interactions with people of different social classes must follow strict protocols. Bowing is essential, with the depth and duration of your bow indicating your relative status. Speaking out of turn or showing insufficient respect can result in public humiliation or worse. The samurai who govern your village have absolute authority. They can demand tribute in the form of rice, labor, or military service. They can punish perceived slights with physical violence. They can redistribute land or property as they see fit. Your life is literally in their hands. As evening approaches, you begin the journey back to your home. The workday doesn't end at a specific time because there's always more work to be done. Fields need tending, tools need repair, firewood needs gathering, and a dozen other tasks require attention. Dinner is similar to your other meals but might include a small portion of fish or meat if someone has been successful hunting or fishing. Protein is scarce and expensive, so most meals are primarily rice and vegetables. The constant lack of variety in your diet would drive most modern people to despair within a week. After dinner, there's no television to watch, no books to read unless you're wealthy and educated, and no electric lights to extend the day. When the sun goes down, your productive day is essentially over. You might sit around the fire pit with your family, sharing stories or discussing the next day's work, but entertainment as we know it doesn't exist. The darkness outside is complete. There are no street lights, no house lights visible through windows, no electric signs or glowing screens. The only light comes from the moon and stars, and on cloudy nights the world becomes pitch black just steps outside your door. Going to bed means laying out your straw mat again and trying to find a comfortable position on the hard wooden floor. The temperature inside your home is only slightly warmer than outside, and during winter months you might wake up to find frost on the inside walls. Sleep comes fitfully because of the physical discomfort and the constant worry about tomorrow's challenges. Will there be enough food? Will the weather cooperate with your farming needs? Will the local samurai demand additional tribute? Will someone in your family become ill with no medical care available? Medical care in a medieval Japanese village was primitive at best and completely absent at worst. Illness meant relying on herbal remedies that may or may not work, and serious injuries often resulted in permanent disability or death. There were no antibiotics, no surgery, no pain medications beyond alcohol and certain plants. Childbirth was especially dangerous for women, with death rates that would be unthinkable today. Many families lost multiple children to diseases that are easily treatable now. The average lifespan was much shorter, and reaching old age was considered a significant achievement. But let's talk about what daily life was really like beyond just the basic survival needs. The social customs and expectations that governed every interaction would be exhausting for someone from our modern world. Every conversation had underlying meanings based on social status, family connections, and current political situations. A simple greeting could convey respect, challenge authority, or signal alliance depending on how it was delivered. Getting these social cues wrong could have serious consequences. Women faced additional restrictions that limited their freedom and opportunities. They were expected to be subordinate to men in all situations, to speak softly and rarely, and to focus their efforts on domestic duties. A woman who spoke too boldly or expressed opinions too freely would be seen as bringing shame to her family. Children had no childhood, as we understand the concept. By age 5 or 6, they were expected to contribute meaningful work to the family's survival. Boys might help in the fields or learn a trade, while girls learned domestic skills like cooking, weaving, and managing a household. Education was limited to the wealthy classes and focused primarily on practical skills rather than abstract learning. Most villagers couldn't read or write, relying instead on oral traditions to pass down knowledge and stories. The concept of privacy didn't exist in the way we understand it. Homes were small with thin walls, and multiple generations often lived together in the same space. Personal belongings were minimal, and the idea of having your own room would have seemed bizarre and wasteful. Religious observances were woven throughout daily life, but not always in ways that brought comfort. There were numerous spirits and deities that had to be appeased, rituals that had to be performed correctly, and taboos that had to be avoided. Failing to observe these religious requirements could bring bad luck or supernatural punishment to your entire family. The village operated on a system of mutual dependence that could be both supportive and suffocating. Everyone knew everyone else's business, and individual choices were often subordinated to community needs. If the village decided that your field needed to be flooded to support the irrigation system, your personal preferences didn't matter. Seasonal changes brought different challenges and opportunities. Spring meant planting season, with long days of back-breaking work preparing fields and sowing seeds. Summer brought the constant battle against insects, weeds, and drought. Fall was harvest time, when the entire village worked together to gather crops before the weather turned. Winter was perhaps the most difficult season, when food stores had to last until the next harvest, and heating fuel was scarce. Many villagers suffered from malnutrition during the late winter months, when the previous year's harvest was running low, and new crops were still months away. The clothing you wore was simple and practical, made from materials like hemp, cotton, or rough silk depending on your social status. Everything was hand-sewn and carefully maintained because replacing clothing was expensive and time-consuming. Most people owned only 2 or 3 complete outfits. Your shoes, if you had them, were simple straw sandals that provided minimal protection from the elements. Most of the time, especially when working in muddy fields, you went barefoot. This meant dealing with cuts, bruises, and infections that could become serious without proper medical care. Personal grooming was basic and infrequent. Bathing was a luxury that required heating large amounts of water, and soap was expensive when it was available at all. Most people cleaned themselves with cold water and rough cloths, and the concept of daily bathing would have seemed wasteful and impractical. Dental care consisted of chewing on certain twigs or roots that might help clean the teeth. But dental problems were common and often painful. There were no dentists, no pain relief for tooth problems, and no way to replace lost teeth. Many older villagers had few teeth remaining. The diet, while providing basic nutrition, was monotonous and often insufficient. Rice was the staple food, but it was frequently mixed with cheaper grains like millet or barley to make it last longer. Vegetables were seasonal and often preserved through pickling or drying for winter consumption. Meat was rare and usually came from small animals like birds or rabbits. Larger animals like cattle or horses were too valuable as work animals to be slaughtered for food except in dire circumstances. Fish was more common in coastal areas but still represented a small portion of the overall diet. The constant physical labor required for survival meant that most villagers were lean and muscular, but also frequently injured and worn down by the demanding lifestyle. Joint problems, back injuries, and repetitive stress injuries were common and had to be endured without effective treatment. Social entertainment existed but was simple and community-focused. Festivals tied to religious or seasonal observances brought music, dancing, and special foods, but these were infrequent events that broke up months of routine work. Most entertainment consisted of storytelling, simple games, or music played on basic instruments. The economic system was largely based on barter and tribute rather than money. Most villagers rarely handled coins, instead trading goods and services directly. Rice served as a standard of value for many transactions, and wealth was measured in terms of land ownership and rice production. Travel beyond the immediate village area was difficult and dangerous. There were no paved roads, no reliable transportation, and no system of inns or rest stops for travelers. Most villagers never traveled more than a few miles from their birthplace during their entire lives. Communication with the outside world was limited to occasional visits from traveling merchants, government officials, or religious figures. News from other regions might take weeks or months to arrive, and much of it was filtered through multiple retellings that could distort the original information. The legal system was based on local customs and the authority of the ruling samurai, rather than written laws or formal courts. Justice was swift but often harsh, with punishments ranging from public humiliation to physical punishment or banishment from the village. Crime was relatively rare within the village because everyone knew each other and social pressure discouraged antisocial behavior. However, when crimes did occur, the entire community might be held responsible and punished collectively. Natural disasters posed constant threats that could destroy years of work in a matter of hours. Floods could wash away crops and homes, earthquakes could level entire villages, and droughts could cause widespread famine. There was no disaster relief system or insurance to help communities recover from these catastrophes. The tools and techniques used for farming and craftsmanship were the result of centuries of development and refinement, but they were still primitive by modern standards. Everything had to be made by hand using basic materials, and the quality of tools often determined the success or failure of important work. Ironworking was a specialized skill that few possessed, making metal tools expensive and precious. Most farming implements were made of wood with small metal pieces only for the cutting edges. Maintaining and sharpening these tools was a constant necessity. The storage and preservation of food required constant attention and careful planning. Granaries had to be protected from rodents and insects. Preserved foods had to be monitored for spoilage, and seed grain for next year's planting had to be carefully set aside despite current hunger. Weather patterns were closely observed and remembered because they directly affected survival. Villagers became expert at reading natural signs to predict weather changes, but they had no reliable way to prepare for extreme weather events. The cycle of seasons dominated every aspect of life in ways that are difficult for modern people to imagine. Your clothing, food, work, and even sleep patterns changed dramatically with the seasons. There was no way to maintain consistent comfort throughout the year. Pregnancy and childbirth were community events because specialized medical care wasn't available. Experienced women in the village served as midwives, but their knowledge was based on tradition and limited experience rather than medical training. Childhood mortality was high, and families had to be emotionally prepared for the loss of children. This created a different relationship between parents and children than we see today, with less emotional investment in individual children and more focus on the survival of the family unit. The elderly were respected for their knowledge and experience, but they also represented a burden on families with limited resources. There was no retirement system or social support for those who could no longer work, so elderly family members depended entirely on their descendants for survival. Marriage was typically arranged by families based on economic and social considerations rather than personal preference. The compatibility between individuals was less important than the alliance between families and the potential for economic cooperation. The roles of men and women were strictly defined and rarely crossed. Women were responsible for domestic work, child rearing, and supporting agricultural activities, while men handled heavy labor, interactions with outside authorities, and major decision-making. Village governance was informal but effective, with decisions made by consensus among the heads of households and approved by the local samurai authority. Individual opinions mattered less than maintaining harmony and stability within the community. The spiritual life of villagers was complex and involved multiple religious traditions, including Buddhism, Shintoism, and local folk beliefs. This created a rich tapestry of rituals, festivals, and observances that provided meaning and structure to daily life. Death was a frequent visitor to medieval villages, and communities had elaborate rituals for dealing with the deceased. These rituals served both spiritual and practical purposes, helping to process grief while ensuring that death didn't disrupt the essential work of survival. The physical environment of the village reflected the practical needs of its inhabitants rather than aesthetic considerations. Buildings were positioned to take advantage of natural features like water sources and protection from wind, and every piece of land was used for some productive purpose. Waste management was a constant challenge without modern sanitation systems. Human and animal waste had to be disposed of in ways that didn't contaminate water sources or create health hazards. But the options were limited and often unpleasant. The seasonal availability of different foods meant that diet varied dramatically throughout the year. Spring brought fresh greens and early vegetables. Summer provided a wider variety of produce. Fall offered the harvest bounty, and winter required reliance on preserved foods. Cooking methods were simple but required skill and experience to produce palatable results. Open fires and basic ceramic vessels were the primary cooking tools, and fuel conservation was always a consideration when preparing meals. The rhythm of daily life was determined by natural light rather than artificial schedules. Work began at sunrise and ended at sunset, with the length of the workday varying significantly between summer and winter months. Water was precious and had to be used carefully for multiple purposes. The same water might be used for cooking, cleaning, and washing, with the cleanest water reserved for drinking and cooking, while progressively dirtier water was used for other purposes. So there you have it. A day in a medieval Japanese samurai village would challenge every assumption we have about comfort, convenience, and personal freedom. The physical hardships alone would be enough to break most modern people, but the social restrictions and constant uncertainty would be equally devastating. We take for granted things like clean water, varied food, comfortable shelter, medical care, and personal privacy. In a samurai village, none of these things existed in forms we would recognize. Every day was a struggle for survival that required physical strength, mental toughness, and complete acceptance of your place in a rigid social hierarchy. The people who lived in these villages weren't superhuman. They were ordinary people who adapted to extraordinary circumstances because they had no choice. They found ways to create meaning and even happiness within the constraints of their harsh world, but it came at a cost that few of us would be willing to pay. Next time you complain about your morning commute or your difficult boss, remember the rice farmer who worked from dawn to dusk in flooded fields, knowing that a single bad harvest could mean starvation for his entire family. Next time you flip a light switch or turn on a faucet, think about the village woman who walked miles each day to collect water and fuel to keep her family alive. Our modern world, with all its problems and stresses, is a paradise compared to the daily reality of medieval village life. We have freedoms, opportunities, and comforts that the people of these villages could never have imagined. Perhaps understanding their struggles can help us appreciate what we have and make better use of the incredible advantages our modern world provides. But let's dig deeper into the specific challenges that would break most modern people within hours of arriving in a samurai village. The culture shock alone would be overwhelming, but when combined with the physical demands and social restrictions, survival becomes nearly impossible for someone unprepared for this harsh reality. Consider the simple act of going to the bathroom. There are no flush toilets, no toilet paper, no privacy, and no running water for washing afterwards. Instead, You would use a communal latrine that consists of a wooden seat over a deep pit filled with human waste from the entire village. The smell would be overpowering, especially during hot summer months when the odor becomes almost unbearable. Cleaning yourself afterwards involves using leaves, moss, or small stones depending on what's available. The concept of toilet paper won't be invented for centuries, and even basic soap is a luxury that most villagers can't afford. You would learn to time your bathroom visits carefully, because walking to the latrine in the middle of a cold winter night, carrying a small oil lamp for light, is not something you want to do unless absolutely necessary. Privacy, as we understand it, simply doesn't exist. The walls of your home are so thin that every conversation can be heard by your neighbors. Your sleeping area is shared with your entire family, including in-laws and elderly relatives. Personal space is a concept that would seem selfish and impractical to medieval villagers who are focused entirely on group survival. Even your thoughts aren't really private because the social expectations are so rigid that thinking outside the accepted norms would be considered dangerous and antisocial. You would be expected to conform not just in your actions, but in your attitudes and beliefs as well. The work expectations would destroy most modern people within a few days. Imagine waking up before dawn every single day of your life and working until sunset with only brief breaks for meals. Your hands would be covered in blisters within hours, your back would ache constantly from bending over in the fields, and your feet would be cut and bruised from walking on rough ground in inadequate footwear. There are no weekends, no vacation days, no sick leave, and no retirement. You work every day that you're physically capable of working, and when you become too old or injured to work, you become dependent on family members who are already struggling to survive themselves. The diet would be another major shock. Forget about variety, flavor, or balanced nutrition. You would eat rice and vegetables at every meal, with occasional small amounts of fish or meat if you're lucky. There are no spices to make food interesting, no sugar to satisfy sweet cravings, and no processed foods that provide quick energy and satisfaction. Most modern people would develop nutritional deficiencies within weeks of eating a traditional village diet. Vitamin C deficiency would cause scurvy, protein deficiency would lead to muscle wasting, and the lack of diverse nutrients would affect everything from your immune system to your mental health. The constant hunger would be maddening. Even when you've eaten your allocated portion of food, you would still feel hungry because the portions are designed to provide just enough calories to keep you working, not enough to feel satisfied or comfortable. Going to bed hungry would become a normal part of your daily experience. Let's talk about the social dynamics that would be impossible for most modern people to navigate. Every interaction is governed by complex rules about status, respect, and proper behavior. Speaking to someone of higher social rank requires specific language, specific body postures, and specific timing that must be learned through years of observation and practice. Making a mistake in these social interactions isn't just embarrassing, it can have serious consequences. Showing insufficient respect to a samurai could result in physical punishment or even death. Speaking out of turn in a community meeting could lead to social ostracism that would make life in the village unbearable. The concept of individual rights that we take for granted today would be completely foreign. You have no right to free speech, no right to privacy, no right to choose your profession or your marriage partner, and no right to leave the village without permission from the ruling authority. Your life belongs to the community and the samurai who govern it, not to yourself. Women would face additional challenges that would be shocking by modern standards. A woman's value is measured entirely by her ability to produce children and manage household duties. She has no legal rights, no voice in important decisions, and no protection from abuse or mistreatment beyond what her male relatives are willing to provide. A woman who fails to produce children, especially male children, would be considered a failure regardless of her other qualities or contributions. Infertility, which we now know can be caused by male or female factors, was always blamed on the woman and could result in divorce or abandonment. The medical care available would terrify anyone accustomed to modern health care. Illness is treated with herbal remedies that may or may not work, and serious injuries are often left to heal on their own. There are no painkillers beyond alcohol and certain plant extracts, no antibiotics to fight infections, and no surgical procedures to repair damage. Broken bones might be set with crude splints, but if the break is complicated, you could end up permanently disabled. Infections that we consider minor today could become life-threatening without proper treatment. Even something as simple as a deep cut could become infected and lead to blood poisoning or gangrene. Dental problems would be particularly difficult to endure. Toothaches could last for weeks or months with no relief beyond crude pain remedies. Dental abscesses could spread infection throughout your body, and there would be no way to save an infected tooth except to have it pulled out with primitive tools and no anesthesia. The psychological stress of living in such conditions would be overwhelming for most modern people. The constant worry about food, weather, illness, and social conflicts would create a level of anxiety that would be difficult to manage. There are no mental health services, no counseling, and no medications to help with depression or anxiety disorders. The isolation would be particularly difficult for people accustomed to global communication and entertainment. You would have no contact with the outside world beyond occasional visits from traveling merchants or government officials. News from other regions might take months to reach your village, and much of it would be unreliable or distorted. There are no books to read unless you're wealthy and educated, no music beyond what can be produced with simple instruments, and no art beyond basic functional crafts. Entertainment consists mainly of community festivals, a few times per year, and informal storytelling around the fire pit. The lack of intellectual stimulation would be particularly challenging for people accustomed to constant information and mental engagement. Your world would shrink to the boundaries of your village and the immediate concerns of survival, with little opportunity for learning, growth, or creative expression. Sleep would be disrupted constantly by discomfort, noise, and worry. The straw mats provide minimal cushioning against the hard wooden floors, and the thin walls do nothing to block out sounds from neighboring families. During winter, you might wake up multiple times each night from the cold, and during summer, insects and heat would make comfortable sleep nearly impossible. The seasonal changes would affect every aspect of your life in ways that are difficult for modern people to imagine. Winter would bring not just cold weather, but genuine fear about whether your food supplies would last until spring. Summer would mean long hours of back-breaking work in intense heat with no air conditioning or electric fans for relief. Spring flooding could destroy months of work in a few hours, while summer droughts could kill entire crops and leave communities facing starvation. There would be no disaster relief, no insurance, and no government assistance to help you recover from natural disasters. The tools and equipment available would frustrate anyone accustomed to modern efficiency and precision. Farming tools are made entirely by hand using basic materials, and they break frequently under the stress of heavy use. Repairing or replacing tools requires skills that take years to develop and materials that might not be available when you need them. Even basic tasks like measuring distances, weights, or time would be challenging without modern instruments. Timekeeping is based on the position of the sun and rough estimates, which makes coordinating activities with other people difficult and inexact. Transportation is limited to walking or occasionally riding in an ox cart over rough dirt paths that become muddy rivers during rainy seasons and clouds of dust during dry periods. A journey that would take an hour by car today might require an entire day of difficult travel, and longer trips could take weeks. The economic system would be confusing and frustrating for people accustomed to cash transactions and standardized pricing. Most trade is conducted through barter, with the value of goods determined by complex negotiations based on supply, demand, and personal relationships. You would have no access to banking, credit, or savings accounts as we know them today. Wealth is stored in the form of rice, land, or physical goods that can be stolen, destroyed, or confiscated by authorities. There is no insurance to protect your assets, and no legal system to help you recover from financial losses. The legal system is based on local customs and the personal judgment of the ruling samurai rather than written laws or formal procedures. Justice is swift but often arbitrary, with punishments ranging from public humiliation to physical abuse or banishment from the community. There are no lawyers to represent you, no appeals process, and no presumption of innocence until proven guilty. If you're accused of a crime, your fate depends entirely on the mood and judgment of whoever has authority over your case. Communication beyond your immediate village would be extremely limited and unreliable. There is no postal system, no telephone, and no internet to connect you with friends or family who live in other areas. Messages must be carried by travelers, and there's no guarantee that they will arrive at their destination or that responses will make it back to you. The concept of news as we understand it doesn't exist. Information about events in other regions arrives sporadically through word of mouth, and much of it is distorted or incomplete by the time it reaches your village. You might not learn about important political changes or natural disasters until weeks or months after they occur. Education is limited to basic skills needed for survival and your specific role in the community. Most villagers never learn to read or write, and advanced knowledge about science, mathematics, or philosophy is reserved for a small elite class that most people never encounter. Children begin working as soon as they're old enough to contribute meaningfully to family survival, usually around age 5 or 6. There is no time for play, exploration, or development of individual interests and talents. Childhood is a distinct life stage with its own needs and characteristics, is a luxury that can't be afforded. The housing would be shocking by modern standards. Homes are small, cramped, and built for basic shelter rather than comfort or privacy. Multiple generations live together in spaces that most modern people would consider inadequate for a single person. There is no insulation, no central heating, and no air conditioning to maintain comfortable temperatures. During winter, the indoor temperature might be only slightly warmer than outside, and during summer, homes become stifling hot boxes with no effective way to cool them down. Lighting comes from oil lamps or candles that provide minimal illumination and create fire hazards. Most activities must be completed during daylight hours because working by lamplight is difficult and expensive. When the sun goes down, your productive day essentially ends. Storage space is extremely limited, which means you can own very few personal possessions. Everything you own must serve multiple purposes or be absolutely essential for survival. The concept of collecting items for pleasure or keeping sentimental objects would seem wasteful and impractical. Personal hygiene would be a constant challenge without running water, soap, or modern cleaning products. Bathing requires heating large amounts of water over a fire, which consumes precious fuel and time that might be needed for other essential tasks. Most people bathe infrequently, perhaps once a week or even less often during winter months. Body odor would be constant and overwhelming by modern standards, but it would become so normal that people would stop noticing it after a while. Laundry is done by hand using cold water and harsh soap made from animal fat and ash. Clothes are washed infrequently because the process is time-consuming and hard on the fabric. Most people own only 2 or 3 complete outfits, and these must last for years with careful maintenance and frequent repairs. The social pressure would be unbearable for anyone accustomed to individual freedom and self-expression. Every aspect of your behavior is monitored and judged by your neighbors, and any deviation from accepted norms is quickly noticed and discussed. Gossip spreads rapidly through the small community, and reputation is everything. Making enemies or losing social standing can make life in the village extremely difficult or even impossible. You depend on your neighbors for help during emergencies, for participation in community work projects, and for social interaction that makes the harsh life bearable. Being ostracized from the community could be a death sentence. The religious obligations would be confusing and stressful for modern people, unfamiliar with the complex spiritual beliefs of medieval Japan. There are numerous deities and spirits that must be honored, rituals that must be performed correctly, and taboos that must be avoided to prevent supernatural punishment. Failing to observe religious requirements could bring bad luck not just to yourself but to your entire family and possibly the whole village. The responsibility for maintaining proper spiritual relationships adds another layer of stress to daily life that is already overwhelmed with practical concerns. The seasonal festivals provide brief respites from the grinding routine of survival, but even these celebrations come with social obligations and expectations that must be navigated carefully. Bringing the wrong gift, wearing inappropriate clothing, or failing to show proper respect to important community members could create problems that last for months. The physical environment itself would be hostile to modern sensibilities. The air quality is poor due to constant wood smoke from cooking and heating fires. The water supply, while generally clean, sometimes carries diseases that can cause serious illness or death. The soil is contaminated with human and animal waste that is used as fertilizer. Insects are everywhere, and there's no effective way to control them. Mosquitoes, flies, fleas, and other pests make life miserable, especially during warm months. They carry diseases, contaminate food, and make sleep difficult. The constant buzzing and biting would drive most modern people to distraction. Rodents are another constant problem, getting into food supplies and spreading disease. Cats are kept to control rat and mouse populations, but they can't eliminate the problem entirely. You would learn to sleep through the sounds of mice scurrying through the walls, and to check all food carefully for signs of contamination. The noise levels would be surprising to modern people accustomed to controlling their acoustic environment. During daylight hours, villages are filled with the sounds of people working, animals moving around, children playing, and various activities taking place. There's no escape from community noise because the buildings provide little sound insulation. At night, different sounds take over. You hear people coughing, snoring, talking, and moving around in neighboring homes. Animals make noise throughout the night as they deal with predators, weather, or simple restlessness. The sounds of the natural environment, from wind to rain to insects, are much more noticeable without the background hum of modern machinery. Weather becomes a dominant force in your life in ways that modern people struggle to understand. You have no protection from extreme temperatures, no early warning systems for storms, and no way to control your environment when conditions become dangerous or uncomfortable. A sudden thunderstorm can destroy weeks of work in minutes, flooding fields and washing away crops that represent your family's survival for the coming year. Hail can devastate gardens and orchards, leaving communities facing hunger with no way to replace the lost food. Extreme heat can make outdoor work dangerous or impossible, but the work must continue anyway because there's no other way to ensure survival. You would learn to work in the early morning hours and late evening when temperatures are more bearable, but middle-of-the-day work often can't be avoided. Cold weather brings different challenges that are equally difficult to manage. Heating fuel is expensive and must be used sparingly, so indoor temperatures remain uncomfortably cold throughout winter months. Water freezes in containers, making basic tasks like cooking and cleaning more difficult and time-consuming. The social isolation would be particularly difficult for people accustomed to diverse social networks and regular contact with friends and family who live in different areas. Your social world consists entirely of the few dozen people who live in your village, and personality conflicts or social problems can make life miserable with no escape. If you don't get along with certain people in the village, you still have to interact with them regularly for community work projects, religious observances, and simple daily activities like drawing water from the well. There's no way to avoid people you dislike or who dislike you. The lack of mobility means that social problems can't be solved by moving to a different community. You're stuck with the same people for your entire life, which creates pressure to maintain harmonious relationships even when they're difficult or unpleasant. Marriage arrangements would be shocking to modern people who expect to choose their own romantic partners based on personal attraction and compatibility. Marriages are arranged by families based on economic considerations, social status, and community needs rather than individual preferences. Young people have little or no input into these decisions, and refusing an arranged marriage could result in being disowned by your family and ostracized from the community. Love, if it develops at all, is expected to grow after marriage rather than being a prerequisite for the relationship. The complete lack of privacy in marriage would be disturbing to modern couples. Newlyweds often live with extended family members in small homes where intimate conversations and activities can be overheard by others. Marital problems become community knowledge very quickly, adding social pressure to personal conflicts. Pregnancy and childbirth would be terrifying experiences without modern medical care. Maternal mortality rates are high, and many women die in childbirth or from complications that develop afterwards. Even successful births often result in permanent health problems for the mother. Infant mortality is also extremely high, with many babies dying within their first year of life from diseases, malnutrition, or birth complications. Families must be emotionally prepared for the loss of children, which creates a different relationship between parents and children than we see in modern families. The economic uncertainty would create constant anxiety for people accustomed to regular paychecks and financial security. Your income depends entirely on factors beyond your control, including weather, crop yields, market conditions, and the demands of the ruling authorities. A single bad harvest can push your family from relative stability into starvation within a few months. There are no unemployment benefits, no food stamps, and no social safety net to help you survive economic disasters. Your survival depends entirely on your own resources and whatever help your community can provide. Debt becomes a serious problem when families are forced to borrow rice or other necessities to survive difficult periods. Interest rates are high, and collection methods are harsh, sometimes resulting in families losing their land or being forced into indentured servitude to pay off their obligations. The technology limitations would frustrate modern people who are accustomed to efficient tools and mechanical assistance for difficult tasks. Everything must be done by hand using basic tools that require significant physical strength and skill to operate effectively. Simple tasks like cutting wood, grinding grain, or moving heavy objects require hours of hard physical labor that machines can accomplish in minutes today. The constant physical demands would exhaust most modern people within a few hours, yet village life requires this level of exertion every single day. Repair and maintenance of tools and equipment is a constant necessity because everything is handmade and subject to frequent breakage under heavy use. Learning to maintain and repair your essential tools becomes a survival skill that requires years of practice to master. The information limitations would be particularly difficult for people accustomed to instant access to knowledge and answers. When you have questions about medical problems, technical challenges, or other issues, there's no way to research solutions or get expert advice from outside your immediate community. Local knowledge, passed down through generations of oral tradition, is often the only source of information available. This knowledge can be extremely valuable and practical, but it can also be incomplete, outdated, or simply wrong. There's no way to verify information or compare different approaches to solving problems. Decision-making becomes much more difficult when you can't research options or consult experts who have dealt with similar situations. You must rely on the limited experience of your community members and hope that their advice is sound and applicable to your specific circumstances. The lack of specialized services would force modern people to develop skills in areas where they have no experience or interest. You would need to become competent in construction, textile production, food preservation, animal care, basic medicine, and dozens of other specialties that are handled by professionals in modern society. Failure to develop these essential skills could mean the difference between survival and death for your family. There are no contractors to hire, no specialists to consult, and no stores where you can purchase the products and services you need. Everything must be produced within your household or obtained through barter with neighbors. The constant physical discomfort would wear down modern people who are accustomed to controlling their environment for maximum comfort. Pain becomes a constant companion as your body adapts to sleeping on hard surfaces, working in awkward positions, and dealing with injuries that don't heal properly. Joint problems develop early and worsen over time as the constant physical demands take their toll on your body. Back pain, knee problems, and repetitive stress injuries become part of daily life that must be endured without effective treatment or pain management. The psychological impact of constant physical discomfort, combined with social stress and economic uncertainty, would create mental health challenges that would be difficult to manage without modern therapeutic interventions and medications. So when you really think about it, surviving even a single day in a medieval samurai village would require a complete transformation of everything you expect from life. The physical demands would challenge even the strongest modern people, the social restrictions would frustrate anyone accustomed to individual freedom, and the constant uncertainty would create anxiety levels that most of us have never experienced. The people who lived in these villages weren't superhuman, but they were shaped by their environment in ways that made them capable of enduring hardships that would break most of us within hours. They developed physical and mental toughness through necessity, not choice, and they found ways to create meaning and even happiness within the constraints of their harsh world. Understanding their daily reality helps us appreciate the incredible advantages and freedoms we enjoy in our modern world. We have choices they could never imagine, comforts they could never access, and opportunities they could never pursue. Perhaps recognizing their struggles can help us make better use of the privileges we often take for granted and find greater satisfaction in the remarkable lives we're able to live today.